Welcome to this short video created by the University of the West of Scotland as a part of the PEDAL project, which has been co-funded by the European Union. This video is about ICT, or Information and Communication Technology, and languages teaching. I'll begin by talking about some of the benefits that are associated to languages teaching when we incorporate ICT into our classroom practices. First of all, using ICT in languages teaching has been evidenced to support linguistic understanding. A lot of times in languages teaching, we emphasize the way in which additional resources, so visual resources, audio resources, and so on and so forth, can help elaborate meaning and give more context to learners, and certainly ICT can help in this process. ICT can also open up the doors to intercultural understanding, giving learners direct access or more direct access to people who use the target language in other parts of the world. ICT skills are also considered to be life skills in this day and age, which means that when we use ICT in languages teaching, we're ensuring that that languages teaching really is relevant to learners and where they are going to go to next in whatever they do, whatever language they choose to do it in. ICT also affords learners more autonomy and more control over their learning. So you can think about perhaps using a mobile device in your languages teaching at the secondary level, and how this really does put the control of the learning right into the palms of your students. There's a lot of speculation about the benefits of ICT to the motivation of languages learners. And there's many people who would assume that using ICT in languages teaching will automatically equate to higher levels of motivation. Now, this has not actually been very well evidenced in previous research because there can be so much variety in terms of how we incorporate ICT into languages teaching. Here, what I would suggest to you is that ICT, when it is relevant and when it feels real to students, will have beneficial impacts on their levels of motivation. But if the ICT feels dated, if it feels forced or irrelevant, then this may not have positive consequences on their motivation. So there is this opportunity, there is this speculation that it would be useful to motivation. But of course, as with everything else, the onus is on you as the teacher to make sure that we really exploit in the most beneficial way possible the promises of ICT to languages teaching and learning. There are some drawbacks to using ICT in languages teaching, and many of these drawbacks are not specific to languages teaching, but actually would apply to any curricular area in which we're working with ICT. So first and foremost would be accessibility. Of course, there will be some situations in which a classroom is better equipped for the integration of ICT than others, but we also want to think about what learners might have available to them in the home environment. So, for example, homework that requires the use of a mobile phone or a personal computer may be appropriate in many educational contexts here in Scotland, but perhaps in a more deprived area, or if you have a student whose family has perhaps taken a stance against technology, this would not be an equitable practice. There are safety concerns, and these are widely reported on in the press as well as in research, particularly when we're working with social media technologies. We want to think about the safety of our students. Here, there are also concerns about the way in which learners, particularly at the secondary level, are engaging with information communication technologies at home, and how they would be engaging with these kinds of technologies in the classroom. So for example, you might find that your users are very active on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, and they have a lot of freedom in terms of what they choose to view and choose to post online in their home time. But of course, in a school environment, everything has to be much more controlled and restricted. And again, tying back to this notion of motivation, the differences between what these students are doing at home and the more restricted things they're able to do with ICT in the classroom might have some negative consequences on motivation. So that's something that you have to negotiate as a teacher. One of the main drawbacks for the use of ICT in any curricular area is teacher knowledge and beliefs. So you may be confident, or you may feel slightly less confident about using ICT in your teaching practices. Your self-study task, which can be downloaded from the blog spot for the Pedal project in this session, will help to try and assist you in setting and achieving goals in terms of incorporating ICT into your professional practice. The issue of teacher confidence also has to do with the fact that ICT and communication technology in general is ever changing. So as soon as you become comfortable with one technique that you can incorporate into your teaching, someone will invent a new one. But that sort of change isn't something to be afraid of. Hopefully it's something that we can embrace. The final concern, and this is a concern that is very specific to languages teaching, is that rather than opening doors and giving learners the opportunity to come into contact with other cultures and other languages, that this might actually reinforce distance. So we might accidentally, in the use of ICT in languages teaching, reinforce the idea that people who speak language X or language Y are somehow fundamentally different to the people who are using English or Scots or Gaelic here in Scotland. So that's something that as a teacher you'll want to be aware of, and you'll want to evaluate frequently in terms of your professional practice to make sure that you aren't accidentally allowing students to reinforce stereotypes. In terms of the ICT that is incorporated into education here in Scotland, there are a few things that I'll run through, and you can keep a mental note of the ones that you already work into your professional practice. And probably just as interesting would be to make a note of these forms of ICT that we can use here in Scottish education that you aren't currently using in your practice, because these might be the things that you want to target for development. So first and foremost would be the use of the interactive whiteboard in classroom practice. You can also think about games-based learning, coding, movie making, and movie making is, I think, fairly frequently used in languages education because it does afford an opportunity for students to speak the language. Creating animations, using Web 2.0 tools. So for example, here in Scotland, we might ask students to produce a classroom blog on Glow. We might ask them to engage with a blog that has already been created on Glow. We could ask them to create a wiki. We could ask them to engage with or create a wiki space. There's also podcasting. Again, this is a very obvious one for languages teaching. And when I say obvious, that's with no criticism. Podcasting, again, affords students the opportunity to actually speak the language, which is a crucial part of languages teaching and learning. We can also think about mobile devices and how these can be incorporated into the students' learning. And social media, but of course, within a classroom context, this is slightly more difficult to navigate, but we can think about Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth, being very mindful to safety issues. And that concludes this very short presentation on the use of ICT in languages teaching. For more information, you can visit the Pedal Project website or the University of the West of Scotland's Pedal Project National Course website. Both of those things are linked in the description of this video.